Today, what I'm talking about is Jesus saying he's the good shepherd. And Bob, when he read out Isaiah, Isaiah 40:11 talked about God being the shepherd. But the text that I'm taking this from is, as you know, we're going through the I am statements of Jesus, and this comes from John chapter 10, and I'll read the 18 verses that kind of talk about it. Gives the context. This is Jesus speaking to a number of people, not specifically in there, but he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him, the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him. They know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and they will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father." And so the two verses are 11 and 14, Jesus saying, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep." So in this passage, Jesus actually has two I ams. Andrew spoke about the I am the door a few weeks ago. But Jesus also talked about the sheep. And so he's using this whole thing about sheep and shepherds as a parable or an analogy. So what is what does the shepherd kind of do, and what was the context that Jesus was talking to them? Because kind of think about maybe shepherds here. I mean, in New Zealand, there's like 50 million sheep and 3 million people. So New Zealand has lots of shepherds, and they kind of ride around on motorbikes and quad bikes and have dogs and all the rest of it. In Australia, if you've got the sheep or something, they're doing it probably by helicopter and that. So it's kind of different. They didn't have helicopters and quad bikes and flocks of 3,000 sheep. So what were the shepherds doing? Well, during biblical times, the families in the Middle East relied upon the sheep to give them wool, food, and sheepskin. And so the sheep were actually quite valuable. So the shepherds would actually stay with the flocks to protect them day and night. And the shepherds, certainly in the Old Testament, they were often, but not always, a child. Okay, so frequently we went to the youngest boy in the family. He served as a family until he grew older, and he could do hard manual labour. So the sheep owner frequently tended the flocks himself, but more often than not, they would actually delegate it to their children or their relatives. But someone who they knew, okay? Because in that case, the sheep had more good care, because the keepers had a personal vested interest in this. The you didn't own the sheep and you had no interest in them, then what did you care if they didn't? But so they kind of kept it within the family. And the duties of a shepherd, especially when you had an unenclosed country, because they didn't have fences and that, the sheep just kind of wandered. So the duties were quite kind of onerous. So a number of things that a shepherd had to do, and I don't know about you when you or somebody's speaking and they kind of say, well, let's have a look at that. Automatically, I'm starting to think, well, how does this relate to God? So draw your own sort of conclusions, because we'll kind of come to that. But Jesus has said he's the shepherd. Well, a shepherd, one of the things a shepherd did was they would protect the sheep. So whatever their age, whether they were a young child or an older person, the shepherd's job was to protect the flock. They had to guide and lead the flock. So in the early morning, they would lead the flock from the fold. So at night time, they'd be in the fold. And then march at the head of them to the spot where they were going to be pastured. And this was really important. It was actually extremely important for the shepherd to get to a good location with the sheep, because good pastures kept the flocks healthy. So they didn't have their own, they just kind of ate out all the grass out there, and they had to keep going somewhere. Because the flocks weren't fed in pens or folds. In the UK, a lot of the time, cattle and sheep and that are actually kept in a barn and fed. Well, that didn't happen there. They had to go out, but summer and winter, they had to go out and forage. In 1910, 1911, there was a massive storm, unprecedented apparently, in northern Syria, and accompanied by snow more than about 3 feet deep, and it covered the ground for weeks. And during that time, hundreds of thousands of sheep and goats perished. It wasn't so much from the cold, but because they had no food. So the goats hunt out the best feeding ground, but the sheep are a bit more helpless and stupid and the rest of that, and they don't. And they have to be led. And that's one of the things. I remember years ago in New Zealand, we were talking about sheep and that, and one of the guys, he grew up on a farm, and I was in the farming district, and he said, sheep are actually really kind of stupid in some way. One sheep jumps and bangs the head, the rest of them go, oh, that's a good idea. So sheep, following like a herd of sheep, it's kind of, we get this impression. So it's really important, so they're pretty helpless. They've got to be led to their food, and they don't possess the instinct of many other animals on finding their way home either. So I've really watched it here, but in New Zealand, and I think you get it here on TV as well, you get these country file type programs where you have these sheepdog competitions where you've got 3 sheep or 6 sheep and you've got a dog and you've got to round them up, and the sheep are pretty good, and then they just go, kind of do it. So they're a bit headstrong and stupid, and they don't always do what you want to do. But in this case, you've got a shepherd has to lead them. So the shepherd has to guide and lead them to good pastures. The shepherd has to make sure that the sheep are fed. Okay? Getting them to if shepherd gives them grass of poor quality, then the sheep would be malnourished. And as well, the shepherd had to make sure that they had enough enough water. And this is slow moving, easily accessible water. It's not good taking them to a fast flowing waterfall or something like that. Because if the water moved too quickly, then the sheep would be afraid they wouldn't want to drink from it. So it had to be slow and moving. In these lands, you had to kind of find out where that was. Sometimes there was wells, maybe some troughs, but other times you had to go and find these things, the slow-moving water. And the flocks should have been watered at least once a day. And frequently the nearest water was quite a few hours away. So you had to travel quite a distance. So finding somewhere that was really good, that was slow, was really important. So the shepherd would actually carry around a pail sometimes as well, so that they could draw water for the sheep. So the shepherd is protecting, they're guiding and leading, they're feeding, they're watering, and they're watching over the sheep. They're watching over them all day, taking care that none of them stray. And if any did kind of disappear and wandered away, then seek diligently till we found the sheep and brought them back. And then at night time, the shepherd would have to bring them back home, okay? Making sure that they're home in the fold, and counting them to make sure that there were none lost. And count them, and they'd often have a rod, and they'd pass under the rod and count them to make sure none were missing. And sometimes he had to do this at night time, and he had to protect them from the attack of wild beasts or a thief or something like that. So as you go through this, you think of all the different parables and stories that keep going. You can just kind of see some of the parables and stories that Jesus has told about, the parable of the 99 sheep, where the shepherd's got 100 sheep and one is lost, and he goes out searching for it. So this is all based on, this is the context that Jesus is talking about when he's talking about a shepherd. And a shepherd typically carried a number of things with them. They carried a cloak, which would keep, made from wool or sheepskins, and would keep them warm. They'd have a rod, and that was a sturdy stick with a knob at one end, and that would sometimes even had nails on it apparently to make it better. So that was to protect the sheep from wild animals or threats. They'd have a staff, and they'd have a staff often long that might rest their arms against or something. It was used as a walking stick and also to maneuver the sheep. So if we think about Psalm 23, I rod and my staff, that's two things. I never realised that until about a few months ago when someone mentioned it. But you've got a rod which guides, rod which protects the enemy, and the staff which guides. Some of the shepherds would have a sling as well. Famous shepherd in the Old Testament would be David. Yes, he had a sling. So a shepherd would do that to fling the rocky projectiles at a good distance. Okay. Sometimes they'd have a pipe or something. If the shepherd was there and they're getting bored just watching the sheep, they might play the pipe. And so sometimes that would happen, and we'll get stories of that in the Old Testament as well. They'd have a pouch to carry their things in, and actually, interestingly, apparently they occasionally had a dog, a wild dog to help protect it. But this is what a shepherd does. So when we're talking about what a good shepherd does, as I say, they're protecting the sheep, they're caring for the sheep. So that overall protection, and that's making sure that they've got enough for everything, and that's caring for them, making sure they're watered, fed, that they're not getting lost or anything. They're lost, they are searching for them because it's their responsibility. Because they wouldn't have had a massive 3,000 lots of sheep in their flock. It would be a lot smaller. It has valid responsibility. What I meant by that was, Jesus talks about, I'm the gatekeeper, I'm the one who's sort of allowed to be there. In other words, it was their sheep. They were allowed to be there. That was their responsibility. So they had a right to be there with the sheep. It wasn't that they were an interloper, just decided, there's a flock of sheep, I'll go and look after them. So they're allowed to, so that was what they did. They often knew the sheep by name, and the sheep knew their voice as well. Often what would happen when they were leading them was that the shepherd would have a call. Often they would say it was a guttural call, and it was pretty hard to imitate. Then the flock would follow them. And even if there were two shepherds with two different flocks at the same time, the sheep knew which was their shepherd by the voice. So this is all the kind of the context that we start to understand. That's what Jesus is talking about when he's talking about. So we've got a really good shepherd, and that's what the good shepherd does. Well, a bad shepherd, or often a bad shepherd, would be someone who was just hired, who doesn't really have this vested interest. It's not my flock. I'm getting paid for it. But if the sheep is a bit malnourished, it's not going to affect me. I'm still getting paid for it. So a bad shepherd would often run away, so they wouldn't put their life in danger because it's not their sheep to look after as such. They might sneak into the sheep pen or something, and they might be known by the sheep, but probably not being trusted by the sheep. And I kind of thought, well, what about that sort of the sheep's responsibility to the shepherd, if you like, really? Well, from a sheep's perspective, if I was a sheep and I had a good shepherd there, then I would know that shepherd, and I would obviously follow them as the sheep too. And then I kind of have that security that, I don't have to worry about anything because the shepherd's looking after it all. I've got that belonging. And there's that lack of worry as a sheep. Because why should I worry? The shepherd's doing it. In the Bible, there's actually quite a few references to shepherds and that, and a number of them about, not only the leaders of Israel in the Old Testament being called, or tend to be good and bad shepherds as well, but God is referred to as a shepherd a lot in the Bible. Psalm 28, verse 9, save your people and bless your inheritance. Be their shepherd also and carry them forever. Psalm 80, verse 1, listen, shepherd of Israel, who leads Joseph like a flock. Even Ecclesiastes, one of the books I really like, chapter 12, verse 11, it says, the words of the wise are like goads and like nails, firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by the one shepherd. I realised just had to go through it and jump out there. Then there's Isaiah 40, which Bob had read, which says, he will tend his flock like a shepherd, he will gather the lambs in his arms, talking about. Jeremiah 31:10, hear the word of the Lord, O nations, and declare it in the coastlands far away. Say, he who scattered Israel will gather him, and will keep him as a shepherd keeps his flock. Ezekiel 34:11-12, for thus says the Lord God, behold, I myself will search my sheep, and will seek them out, as a shepherd seeks out his flock when he is among his sheep that have been scattered. So I will seek out my sheep, and I will rescue them from all places where they've been scattered on the day of clouds and thick darkness. So there's lots of imagery and lots of saying about God being a shepherd in the Old Testament. And even in the New Testament, other than Jesus saying, I'm the shepherd, we have Hebrews chapter 13, verse 20. It says, now may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant. So the writer of Hebrews saying that Jesus is the great shepherd. Peter himself in 1 Peter 5:4 says, and when the great shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. So God, the implication Jesus as well, are referred to as shepherd. So this isn't actually something new. When Jesus is saying, I'm the shepherd, in some ways he's going to be saying, you've been hearing about the shepherd from the Old Testament. I am the good shepherd. This is me. So very shortly on, I think after this, Jesus says, I am. And the religious leaders want to stone him because Jesus is aligning himself and saying, I'm God, which is valid to do. But if Jesus is talking about being the shepherd, well, who are the sheep? It's quite a good thing. To my mind, he's referring to people as sheep. And it's not just going to be the people from Israel. The Old Testament it was very clear. It was Israel was the sheep. And they had the great shepherd who was God, and they had shepherds as well, who God referred to, which would be the leaders and the prophets and the priests and that. And sometimes they were good and sometimes they were not. But it's the people, it's us who are sheep for Jesus. And notice that Jesus said, there were sheep who were part of God's, other sheep and other flocks. But there'll be some who will be sheep who are part of God's flock, and some of us who are sheep who will not be part of God's flock. Okay? Because Jesus is saying, there are other sheep out there as well. So it wasn't just the people he was talking to immediately. And I would say that Jesus is indicating that, lo and behold, the Gentiles, us, basically, are part of the sheep as well. But we are the sheep. So then Jesus says, not that just I'm a shepherd, but I'm a good shepherd. So just picking out some of the things that a good shepherd does, what does it mean? Because Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I'm the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. So the first thing that Jesus, our good shepherd, does is he protects us. He laid down his life for us. About 4 weeks' time, we're going to remember Easter, if you like. And the whole crux of that is Jesus dying for us, and then his resurrection. But that's Jesus choosing to die for us. In the same way that a shepherd put his life on the line for the sheep often, and stood in the way of lions or something like that were attacking them, or took risks to find a sheep that was lost. Jesus did the same, but even more. He said, I'm going to die. And Jesus didn't want to die. I don't get that impression. He wasn't looking forward to it with joy. If you read the whole account of the Garden of Gethsemane, he really didn't want to do it, but he chose to. So he's the good shepherd. He protects us. He protects us in terms of dying for us. And we remember this always in our services when we take communion, and specifically when at Easter. Another thing about the shepherd, good shepherd and Jesus, is he knows us by name. We're not just an amorphous mass. We might have got a fairly small flock here. We look at the church worldwide, there's a flock of millions, whatever, but God knows each one of us. He knows all about us. He knows us individually. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 32, Jesus is talking and he says, so everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. I take that to mean that Jesus is going to acknowledge each one of us individually. He's not just going to go, okay, we're going to be all in there. He's going to go, Sheila, Bob, John, etc. In Psalm 139, verse 13, Psalmist is writing, saying about God, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. God knows who we are. Jeremiah, when he was being commissioned, when God was speaking to him, chapter 1, verse 5, he said, before God saying to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And I don't believe that was just for Jeremiah. I believe God knows all of us. Now, we're not all going to be appointed prophets to the nations. I believe that God knows all of us individually. And I find that really encouraging because I have a God. There is a God who knows me personally. Jesus cares for us. Another aspect of the shepherd. He searches for us when we've gone astray. There was a song that our kids did years ago, and we all like sheep have gone astray. Do-ba, or something like that. Psalm Isaiah 53:6, that's it. I can read the song they do, and they do dance to it. But we're all like sheep have gone astray. And we all are, because there was a time when we didn't know God, we were not part of his family. And yet, even in that time, God loved us and died for us. He cares for us. He searched for us. The parable of the lost sheep in Matthew 18, verses 11 to 13, where the shepherd's got 100 sheep, brings them back at night, there's 99. You might go, well, that's 1% loss, that's acceptable. For the shepherd, he said, I've got 99% of them, but I need that 100%, and we go searching for that sheep. And Jesus does that for us. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 to 9, it says, for by grace you've been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it's the gift of God, as a result, not as a result of work, so that no one may boast. By grace, it is not of your own doing. It's God who cares for us. Jesus who cares for us. I'm not saved because what I can do, be it. It's what God has done. And the other one, Jesus talks about entering by the door. And in other words, he's got this valid right to care for us. We're his sheep. And so he will care for us. He's not stealing us against our will from someone else. He's saying, you're mine. I'm entitled to be here. And so when we choose to follow Jesus, we become his sheep. He looks after us. He takes that responsibility. So these are all the things that when Jesus is saying he's a good shepherd, these are the kind of the implications that we're getting. Of course, you could do a whole sermon on Psalm 23, but let's have a quick look at Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. Now, David was a shepherd. And David knew what it was to be a shepherd. That's one of the things I kind of realised as well. When you start to understand what a shepherd was doing, David knew all this kind of stuff implicitly. So all the things about leading sheep out and finding food and water and everything, that would have all come into the context, I'm sure. David knew what a good shepherd was. David had been the one with the sling particularly. So he writes, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In other words, God looks after our needs. It's let's kind of contextualize this with what Jesus is saying. So Jesus is saying, I'm the good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God looks after our needs. He is the good shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. So the green pastures, people say when you do sermons, you learn so much yourself, but these green pastures, that was food, because that's really good for pasture, because if it was just cruddy old sort of bits and pieces of pastures, then I always thought it was kind of, that's nice and relaxing, but this is food as well. This is making sure I'm well fed. And the still waters, I always thought that was nice and refreshing, but this is so that they can drink as well. So when he makes me lie beside green pastures, he leads me beside still waters, he's feeding and clothing me, he's looking after me spiritually and all that. And I'm lying down. And I lie down, I'm resting after my feeding and drinking. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. When I read that and I take that in the context of myself and Jesus being the shepherd, he restores my soul. He's restoring me. He's restoring us. We're going through hard times, because we all do go through hard times. And he's leading me in the right paths. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Again, something that I learned too long ago, something that was pointed out, was that, obviously, that the psalm doesn't say God stops us from going through these places. And in fact, because the shepherd is busy guiding, the shepherd knows exactly that you're going to go through these valleys of the shadow of death, because they've got the staff to do that. But it's saying that the rod is protecting us. The rod and the staff. I would just always read those as just the same word for the same, two different words for the same thing. It's not. The rod is God protecting us when we walk through there. The staff is guiding us through there, so he knows what we're going through the valley of the shadow of death. It's not necessarily a nice place to go through, but we've got that confidence that the shepherd is with us. David's saying, I will fear no evil, because you are with me. And you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my cup with the oil, my head with the oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Again, we get that blessing. So God, Jesus is the good shepherd. And just really kind of think about, if I just step back and go, what's the takeaway point, Malcolm, for Jesus being the good shepherd? What does it really mean? And for me, it's interesting, it came back to very much that I have confidence that God is looking after me and I don't need to worry. To me, that's kind of one of the really key things that comes out for God, for Jesus being this good shepherd for me. There's lots of other things God does for us, but with the shepherd imagery, for me, it's very much just protection. And it's interesting, I was doing, just spending some time reading and sort of thinking about it, and I was reading Matthew 6. It doesn't mention a shepherd specifically. It's Matthew 6, verses 25 to 34. Jesus is talking. He's got the Sermon on the Mountain. He's talking to the people, and he says, for this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life, as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is life not more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the sky, that they do not sow nor reap, nor gather crops into barns, and your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more important than they? Which of you by worrying can add a single day to his lifespan? Why are you worried about clothing? Notice how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor, nor do they spin thread for gold. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes grass of the field, which is alive today, and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not clothe you, much more clothe you? You of little faith. Do not worry then, saying, what are we to eat, or what are we to drink, or what are we to wear for clothing? For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. For your heavenly Father knows you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided to you. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I was reading it, so enough knowing that I was speaking on this anyway, and I'd kind of got it, and I realised that to me is the shepherd of Jesus, that I am the good shepherd. He's going to provide me his food and drink. It doesn't mean I can sit and not work. I'm going to do that. But I'm not to worry. Why should I worry? What is going to happen? And for me at the moment, probably many people, certainly those in Ukraine, it's a worrying time. What is going to happen? What could happen? But I don't need to have that dread and fear of worry. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be concerned with worry. I think it's valid, but the worry I take from here from Jesus is don't paralyze yourself with worry. I'm the good shepherd. Just as shepherds guarded their sheep and kept them and cared for them day and night, so God cares for us. Cares for us day and night. Even when life gets difficult, God's there. He's protecting us. He's guiding us, and he never leaves us. And we can trust that God is the good and the perfect shepherd. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. So how can I just remember that? What's my response to be to Jesus saying, I'm a good shepherd? Well, I need to learn the shepherd's voice. I need to be able to hear God in the midst of everything else, because there'll be some voices that sound similar and quite good, and some that are obviously not. How do I know which Jesus is? I need to spend time with God, learning to listen and recognize how he speaks with me. It may be different to how he speaks with you. But I need to spend that time, because the shepherd didn't just, Dawn just didn't turn up and go, come on, sheep, let's go. And the sheep go, oh yeah, let's go. You have to spend time. I need to stay close to the shepherd. I need to, there's this image in Papua New Guinea, there were these tribes people, and they would capture these wild pigs in that, and they'd put them in a pen, and the person would go in, and the pigs would spend all their time running away. And then as they got to know the person more and more, they would spend more time with them, and they could finally take away the barriers from them. And it's kind of this, rather than seeing how far away I can get from God, it'd still be called a Christian. What can I still do and still get to heaven, God? Maybe I should be changing my focus and saying, how close can I get to you, God? And then I don't need to worry about how far I can go. So staying close to the shepherd, seeking to be, to spend time with him, to learn his voice, and to be close with him. And the other thing I've got to do as a sheep, which I might not like, is accept his guidance and trust that actually he knows a better way than me. That maybe I don't know best in some things, and it might not make much sense. It might seem a bit strange, and it might be a bit tough or frustrating, but trust that he knows what better is. Because Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Let's finish with a song which would be no surprise. The Lord's my shepherd. I think there's so much in that whole imagery of the shepherd. But as I say, for me, the overriding thing for me with Jesus being my shepherd is that security and not needing to worry and being cared for. And at a time when there's a lot of worry around, and certainly in Europe anyway, I think that's something I'm really grateful to hold on to.